You've probably seen a penny 1,000 times, maybe even ignored one today. But what if I told you that a simple 2008 penny coin, yes, the kind most people don't even bother picking up, could be the beginning of a story so powerful, so unexpected, that it changes everything you thought you knew about luck, value, and life itself? This isn't just any coin. The 2008 penny carries the face of Abraham Lincoln, symbol of resilience, struggle, and rising against impossible odds. But the real story isn't about history. It's about what happened when one ordinary person found this coin at the exact moment their life was falling apart. No money, no hope, no direction, and then a single penny. What happened next will shock you. Because this tiny coin didn't just sit in a pocket, it started a chain of events no one could have predicted. Opportunities appeared. Decisions changed. And slowly, everything turned around. But here's the real question. Was it just luck? Or was that penny something more? Stay with me, because this story isn't just about a coin. It's about the moment everything changes. And trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next. Asterisk, you've probably seen a penny 1,000 times. Maybe even today, lying unnoticed on the ground, hidden between cracks in the pavement, or forgotten at the bottom of your pocket. But what if I told you that a single 2008 penny coin, something most people consider completely worthless, could secretly be worth millions of dollars and hold the power to change an ordinary life into something unimaginable? It sounds impossible, almost like something straight out of a movie. But sometimes reality hides its biggest secrets in the smallest places. And this story begins exactly like that, with a man who had nothing left. No money, no direction, no hope, walking through life like a shadow, completely unaware that in just a few seconds, everything was about to change forever. That coin, carrying the face of Abraham Lincoln, wasn't just another piece of copper. It was a mystery, a hidden treasure, and the start of a journey that would take him from being completely broke to discovering something people spend their entire lives searching for. Because what he found wasn't just a penny, it was a rare, almost impossible version of a 2008 coin that collectors dream about. A coin rumored to sell for hundreds of thousands, sometimes even millions under the right conditions. And the moment he picked it up, without even realizing it, he stepped into a story filled with suspense, disbelief, and a twist so shocking that once you hear it, you'll never look at a penny the same way again. And the craziest part is this could happen to anyone. Maybe even you, because the next time you see a coin on the ground, it might not just be 1 cent. It might be a hidden fortune waiting to be discovered. And from the moment that coin touched his palm, something inside him shifted in a way he couldn't explain. Like the world had quietly pressed pause just for him. Even as the noise of traffic, distant sirens, and rushing footsteps continued all around him, and he stood there staring at the small, ordinary-looking 2008 penny as if it was trying to tell him something. As if it carried a secret meant only for him, and for a few seconds he almost laughed at himself. Because how could something so small possibly matter? How could a coin that most people wouldn't even bend down to pick up suddenly feel so heavy, not in weight, but in meaning, in presence, in possibility? And yet he couldn't ignore the feeling, couldn't shake the strange sense that this moment, this tiny interruption in his otherwise broken routine, was somehow important. Even though nothing about his life suggested that anything important was about to happen. Because just hours earlier, he had been sitting in his dim, silent apartment, staring at unpaid bills, calculating how many days he had left before everything collapsed completely, replaying every mistake he had made over the past year, every missed opportunity, every wrong decision, every time he had told himself, "I'll fix it later," until later turned into never. And now, here he was, standing on a sidewalk with nothing but a single coin in his hand and a mind full of doubt. But instead of throwing it back down or stuffing it away without a second thought, like he normally would, he slipped it carefully into his pocket. Almost instinctively, like it mattered more than it should. Like losing it would mean losing something he didn't even understand yet. And as he continued walking, he noticed something unusual, not in the world around him, but in the way he was seeing it, the way his attention shifted. as if picking up that penny had forced him to slow down just enough to actually notice things again. The color of the sky, the sound of leaves scraping against the pavement, the expressions on people's faces as they passed by, all the small details that had been invisible to him for weeks, maybe months, and for the first time in a long time. His thoughts weren't completely consumed by fear. There was a small gap, a tiny opening where something else could exist. Something like curiosity, or maybe even hope, though he wasn't ready to call it that yet. And later that day, when he finally returned to his apartment, he took the coin out of his pocket and placed it on the table, staring at it again, this time more carefully, noticing the year 2008, and wondering why it stood out to him, why it felt different, and out of boredom more than anything else. He grabbed his old laptop, the one that took forever to start and sounded like it might stop working at any moment, and typed in a simple search about 2008 pennies, not expecting much. Maybe just a distraction from everything else going wrong in his life. But what he found made him sit up straight, his tired eyes suddenly alert. Because buried among ordinary results were mentions of rare variations, minting errors, collector's items, coins that looked almost identical to the one sitting on his table, but were worth far more than their face value. Some even described as extremely rare, almost impossible to find. And while most of them weren't worth much, a few stood out coins that had been sold for thousands, even tens of thousands, and rumors almost unbelievable ones, about specific pieces reaching into the realm of hundreds of thousands under the right circumstances. And he felt a strange mix of excitement and skepticism because it sounded too good to be true. And life had taught him not to trust things that sounded like easy solutions. But still, he couldn't ignore it. Couldn't stop looking at the coin and comparing it to the images on the screen. Checking every tiny detail, every marking, every line. His hands slightly trembling as the idea began to grow in his mind. Not fully formed yet, but strong enough to make his heart beat faster. And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel completely empty. It felt uncertain, yes, but also open, like something unexpected could actually happen. And that night, instead of lying awake worrying about everything he had lost, he stayed up researching, reading stories of collectors, of people who had found rare coins by accident, of ordinary moments turning into life-changing discoveries. And even though part of him kept saying this won't happen to you, another part, quieter but persistent, refused to let go of the possibility. And as the hours passed, that small coin on his table stopped being just a coin. It became a question, a challenge, a chance, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something far bigger than he ever imagined. And as the night stretched deeper into silence, broken only by the faint hum of his aging laptop and the occasional sound of cars passing far below his apartment window, he leaned closer to the screen, his eyes moving faster now, scanning every article, every image, every obscure forum discussion he could find about rare 2008 pennies. And the more he read, the more the line between coincidence and possibility began to blur in a way that made his chest feel tight. Because this was no longer just curiosity or distraction. This was something else entirely, something that was slowly pulling him in, something that refused to let him go. And he kept glancing back at the coin resting on the table as if it might suddenly disappear if he looked away for too long, as if it somehow knew it was being watched. And the strangest part was not the information he was finding, but the feeling growing inside him. A quiet but undeniable sense that this wasn't random. That out of all the people walking that street, out of all the moments that coin could have been picked up or kicked aside or lost forever, it had ended up in his hand at the exact moment his life had reached its lowest point. And even though logic told him it was just chance, just probability, just another meaningless event in a world full of them, something deeper kept whispering that it wasn't. That there was a reason, even if he couldn't see it yet. And hours passed without him noticing, his exhaustion replaced by a strange kind of focus he hadn't felt in months, maybe years. And eventually he found something that made him stop completely, his fingers freezing on the keyboard, his breath slowing as he read the same lines over and over again to make sure he wasn't misunderstanding them. A detailed explanation about a rare minting anomaly linked to certain 2008 pennies. Something so subtle that most people would never notice it. Something that required careful observation, precise angles of light, and sometimes even magnification to detect, but if present. It could turn an ordinary coin into something extraordinarily valuable, and his heart began to race as he reached for the coin, picking it up slowly, almost carefully, as if sudden movement might somehow change what he was about to see, and he held it under the weak yellow light of the lamp, tilting it slightly, then again, adjusting the angle just like the article described. His eyes narrowing, focusing on the smallest details, the tiniest imperfections, searching for something he wasn't even sure he fully understood. And for a moment, nothing happened. Just the same worn surface, the same familiar image, the same doubt creeping back into his mind, telling him he was wasting time, chasing something unrealistic, something that people only dreamed about but never actually experienced. And he almost put the coin back down, almost let the moment slip away, almost returned to the quiet certainty of disappointment that had defined his life for so long. But then he saw it, not clearly at first. Not in a way that instantly confirmed anything, but enough to make him pause. Enough to make his pulse quicken again. A tiny irregularity. A detail so small it could easily be ignored. But now that he had noticed it, he couldn't unsee it, and he leaned in closer. His breathing shallow, his thoughts racing, trying to match what he was seeing with what he had read. Trying to convince himself he wasn't imagining it. And in that moment, the room seemed smaller, the air heavier, the world outside completely irrelevant. Because everything, absolutely everything, had narrowed down to that single coin in his hand and the possibility that it might be something more than it appeared. Something rare, something valuable, something that could change everything. And yet with that possibility came fear, because if it was real, if this was actually happening, then it meant his life was about to shift in a way he couldn't control, in a way that would force him to step out of the quiet, predictable struggle he had grown used to. And that kind of change, even when it's good, can be terrifying. And he sat there for a long time just staring at the coin, caught between disbelief and hope, between logic and instinct, between the life he knew and the life that might be waiting just beyond this moment. And slowly, almost unconsciously, a thought began to form, not loud or dramatic, but steady and persistent, a thought that carried more weight than anything else he had considered that night. A thought that refused to be ignored, telling him that this was only the beginning, that whatever this coin was, whatever it meant, whatever path it was about to pull him onto, it wasn't going to be simple, it wasn't going to be easy, and it definitely wasn't going to be something he could walk away from. Because some moments, no matter how small they seem at first, are designed to change everything. And once you step into them, there's no going back to who you were before, and just when he thought the night couldn't get any heavier. When the silence in his apartment had already stretched to its breaking point, and the weight of that tiny coin in his hand felt almost unbearable, something inside him refused to settle, refused to calm down, as if the moment itself was alive. As if it was pushing him forward into something he wasn't ready for, but could no longer avoid. And he slowly stood up from his chair, the floor creaking beneath his feet in the stillness, his eyes never leaving the coin as he walked toward the window, pulling the curtain slightly aside and looking out at the endless lights of the city. Each window, each moving car, each distant figure representing a life. A story, a struggle, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel completely disconnected from it all. Instead, he felt like he was standing on the edge of something vast and unknown. Something that had been there all along, but had only now chosen to reveal itself. And he pressed the coin between his fingers, feeling its edges, its worn surface, its quiet presence, and his mind began racing again. Faster than before, connecting thoughts, possibilities, fears, and questions in a way that almost overwhelmed him, because if this coin was real, if what he had seen wasn't just a trick of light or imagination, then everything he thought he knew about his situation, about his limits, about what was possible for someone like him, would have to change. And that idea alone was enough to make his heart pound against his chest like it was trying to escape. and he turned away from the window. Pacing slowly across the room, the coin still in his hand, as if putting it down would somehow break whatever invisible thread had connected him to this moment. And memories began to surface, not randomly, but in a way that felt strangely connected. Moments from his past where he had ignored small opportunities, dismissed tiny chances, overlooked details that might have mattered more than he realized. And he started to see a pattern, not clearly, not perfectly, but enough to make him question everything, because maybe it wasn't that life had never given him a chance. Maybe it was that those chances had been small, quiet, easy to miss. Just like this penny had been lying unnoticed on the street while hundreds of people walked past it. And the thought hit him harder than anything else that night. Because it meant that this moment wasn't just about luck. It wasn't just about finding something rare or valuable. It was about finally seeing something he had been blind to for so long. And as that realization settled in, something shifted again, deeper this time, more permanent. Like a door opening inside him that he didn't even know existed, and without fully deciding to. Without making a clear plan, he grabbed his jacket, slipped the coin carefully into his pocket, and headed for the door, his movements almost automatic, driven by something he couldn't explain. And within minutes, he was back on the street, the cold air hitting his face. The city alive in a way that felt different now, sharper, more real, and he walked quickly. Not entirely sure where he was going, but knowing he couldn't just sit still anymore. Not after what he had discovered, not after what he had felt. And his mind kept returning to one idea over and over again. That if this coin was truly something rare, something valuable, then there had to be someone who could confirm it. Someone who understood these things at a level he didn't. Someone who could tell him whether he was standing at the edge of something life-changing or just chasing another illusion. And that thought pushed him forward through the streets, past closed shops, dimly lit alleys, and the occasional late-night passerby who paid him no attention. And as he walked, the city seemed to transform around him. Not physically, but in the way he perceived it. Every shadow deeper, every light brighter, every moment carrying a strange sense of significance. As if the world itself was aware that something important was unfolding. And eventually he found himself standing in front of a small, nearly forgotten shop tucked between two larger buildings, its sign faded. Its windows filled with old coins, collectibles, and objects that seemed to belong to another time. And he hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering near the door. Because stepping inside would mean crossing a line, it would mean turning possibility into reality. One way or another, and there would be no going back to ignorance. No returning to the simple uncertainty he had lived in before. And for a brief second, fear tried to pull him back. Tried to convince him to walk away, to pretend none of this had happened. To return to the familiar struggle of his old life, because at least that was predictable. At least that was safe in its own painful way. But then he felt the coin in his pocket again, and something stronger than fear took over. Something steady, something determined, and he pushed the door open. The faint sound of a bell echoing through the quiet shop as he stepped inside. The air thick with the scent of age and history. And in that moment, without fully realizing it, he left behind the version of himself who had walked past countless opportunities without noticing them, and stepped into a story that was only just beginning. A story where every small detail mattered, where every choice carried weight, and where a single, seemingly insignificant, penny had the power to change everything forever. And the moment he stepped fully inside the shop, the outside world seemed to collapse behind him as if it had never existed at all. The noise of the city fading into a distant memory, replaced by a dense, almost suffocating stillness that wrapped around him like a heavy curtain. And for a second he just stood there near the door, unsure whether he had made the right decision or stepped into something far bigger than he could control. Because the air itself felt different in this place, thick with time, filled with objects that had outlived the people who once owned them, coins, artifacts, forgotten pieces of history sitting quietly in glass cases as if waiting for someone to give them meaning again. And his eyes slowly adjusted to the dim lighting as he took a few careful steps forward, his heartbeat echoing louder in his ears with each movement, and he could feel the penny in his pocket like it had its own presence now. Like it was no longer just metal, but something alive in its own strange way. something that had brought him here for a reason he still didn't fully understand. And as he moved deeper into the shop, he noticed the walls lined with shelves filled with coins from different eras. Different countries, each one carrying a story. Each one carrying a story. Each one proof that value is never just about size or appearance, but about rarity, timing, and the unseen details that most people overlook. And that thought alone made his chest tighten again, because it mirrored his own life in a way that was almost too clear to ignore. And then, from the far end of the shop, a voice broke the silence, calm, steady, and slightly rough with age, asking him if he was looking for something specific or just wandering, and he turned quickly, his body tensing for a moment before he saw the man behind the counter, older, sharp-eyed, the kind of person who seemed to notice everything without needing to try. And for a second, Ethan hesitated, unsure how to explain why he was there, unsure how to put into words the strange pull that had brought him into this place in the middle of the night. But then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the coin, placing it carefully on the counter between them as if it was something fragile, something important, and the man didn't react immediately. Didn't show surprise or excitement, just looked at it quietly, his expression unreadable. And that silence stretched longer than Ethan expected. Long enough for doubt to start creeping back in. Long enough for him to question everything again, to wonder if he had imagined the whole thing, if he had let desperation turn an ordinary coin into something extraordinary in his mind. And just as he was about to say something, to break the silence, to maybe laugh it off and walk away before embarrassing himself further, the man finally spoke, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a tone that carried weight, asking him where he found it. And something about that question, the way it was asked, made Ethan's pulse spike instantly, because it wasn't dismissal, it wasn't casual curiosity. It was something else, something more serious. And he explained quickly at first, then slower, more carefully, describing the sidewalk the moment he noticed it, the way it felt different even before he understood why. And the man listened without interrupting, his eyes occasionally shifting between Ethan and the coin. And when the explanation ended, the silence returned again. But this time it felt different, heavier, more focused, like something was about to be revealed. And the man reached under the counter, pulling out a small magnifying glass and a soft cloth, handling the coin with a level of care that made Ethan's breathing shallow, because no one treats something worthless like that. No one examines an ordinary penny with that kind of attention unless there's a reason. And as the man leaned closer, studying the surface, the edges, the tiny imperfections that most people would never notice, the seconds began to stretch into something unbearable, each moment filled with tension, with anticipation, with the overwhelming need to know what this coin truly was. And Ethan found himself gripping the edge of the counter, his mind racing through every possibility, every outcome, trying to prepare himself for both disappointment and something far beyond it. And then, finally, the man leaned back slightly, exhaling slowly, his eyes meeting Ethan's in a way that immediately made everything feel different. And he said something that didn't just change the moment, didn't just answer a question, but completely shattered the reality Ethan thought he understood. Because what he said wasn't simple, wasn't expected, and definitely wasn't something Ethan was ready to hear. And in that instant, the small, overlooked, almost forgotten 2008 penny stopped being just a coin entirely and became something else. Something rare, something dangerous in its own way. Something that carried value far beyond money. Something that would pull Ethan into a chain of events he couldn't stop, even if he wanted to. Because from that moment forward, nothing in his life would ever be small or insignificant again. And the idea of millions, something that once felt distant and unreachable, no longer seemed impossible. It felt close, real, almost within reach. But with that realization came something else too. Something darker, something he hadn't considered before. Because when something that valuable exists in the world, it doesn't stay hidden forever. And the question was no longer just what the coin was worth, but who else might be looking for it, who else might recognize what it truly is, and how far they would be willing to go to get it. Asterisk. And the moment those words settled into the air, Not loudly, but with a quiet certainty that felt heavier than anything Ethan had heard in years. It was as if the entire room shifted around him, as if the walls themselves leaned closer to listen. And his mind struggled to keep up with what had just been said. Because it wasn't just the implication of value. It wasn't just the mention of something rare or unusual. It was the tone, the seriousness. The way the old man's eyes didn't leave his for even a second, as if measuring not just the coin, but the man standing in front of him. And Ethan felt something unfamiliar rising in his chest, not just excitement, but pressure. A tightening sense that whatever he had stepped into was far more complicated than he had imagined. And for a moment he tried to speak, tried to ask the obvious question about what exactly made the coin special, about how much it could be worth, about whether this was real or some kind of misunderstanding. But the words didn't come out right. They tangled in his throat because deep down he already understood that this wasn't going to be a simple answer. This wasn't going to be a quick confirmation followed by an easy solution. And the old man seemed to sense that hesitation because, instead of answering immediately, he turned the coin slightly under the light again, pointing at a nearly invisible detail along the edge. Something so small it looked meaningless at first glance. And yet the way he focused on it made it feel like the center of everything. And Ethan leaned in closer without even realizing it, his eyes straining to see what the man was seeing. His breathing shallow, his thoughts racing faster now, because every second of silence added weight to the moment. Every pause stretched the tension further until it felt almost unbearable. And then the explanation finally came, slow, deliberate, not rushed, as if each word needed to land exactly where it was meant to. Describing a rare minting inconsistency tied to a limited run of coins from 2008, something that had only been documented a handful of times, something that most collectors would go their entire lives without ever encountering. And as the explanation unfolded, Ethan's sense of reality began to shift again. Not all at once, but in layers, piece by piece. As the possibility turned into probability, and the probability edged closer to certainty, and with each detail, with each confirmation, the weight of the coin seemed to increase in his mind until it no longer felt small at all, until it felt like he was holding something far beyond its physical form, something that carried consequences, something that demanded decisions, and the room seemed smaller now, the air heavier, the silence more intense, because the truth was no longer abstract. It was right there in front of him, impossible to ignore. And yet with that clarity came a new kind of fear, one that hadn't existed before. Because up until this point, his life had been defined by lack, by limitation, by the slow, predictable grind of trying and failing and trying again. But now, suddenly there was something else on the table, something unpredictable, something powerful. And that kind of shift doesn't just bring opportunity, it brings risk, it brings attention. And the old man's next words made that painfully clear. Because he didn't just talk about value, he talked about awareness. About how coins like this don't stay hidden forever once they're recognized. About how there are people, collectors, dealers, and others far less visible, who spend their lives searching for pieces like this. People who monitor auctions, track discoveries, follow rumors, and once something like this surfaces, even quietly, it has a way of attracting interest. Sometimes the kind of interest that doesn't ask politely, and as those words sank in, Ethan felt a chill run through him despite the still air of the shop. Because the situation had just expanded beyond what he could control, beyond what he had prepared for, and suddenly the idea of millions wasn't just exciting. It was complicated. It was dangerous in a way he hadn't considered. And he found himself glancing toward the door. Not out of fear exactly, but out of instinct. As if some part of him already understood that stepping into this world meant being seen in ways he wasn't used to. And the old man noticed that too, his expression softening slightly. Not with reassurance, but with understanding, as if he had seen this reaction before. As if he knew exactly what Ethan was feeling in that moment. And he leaned forward just enough to lower his voice. Not dramatically, but enough to signal that what came next mattered. Explaining that if Ethan wanted to move forward, if he wanted to truly understand what he had and what it could become, he would need to be careful, deliberate, and above all, aware. Because once a coin like this is verified and enters the right channels, it doesn't just sit quietly in someone's pocket anymore. It becomes part of a system, a network of attention, value, and competition. And at that point, it's no longer just about what it's worth. It's about who knows it exists and how much they're willing to do to get it. And those words lingered in the air long after he finished speaking, settling into Ethan's mind with a weight that made it impossible to go back to thinking of this as a simple discovery. And for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence filled with everything that had been said and everything that hadn't, and Ethan slowly reached out, taking the coin back into his hand, feeling its surface again, its edges, its quiet, unassuming form, and it was almost surreal to think that something so small could carry so much. That something most people would ignore without a second thought could suddenly become the center of a story this complex, this intense, this unpredictable. And as he stood there, caught between disbelief and realization, one thing became painfully clear. Whether he was ready or not, whether he wanted it or not, his life had already changed the moment he picked up that penny. And whatever came next, whatever choices he made from this point forward, would not just determine what the coin was worth, but what he himself was willing to risk, to face, and to become in the process. Because sometimes the smallest discoveries don't just open doors, they pull you into worlds you never knew existed. Worlds where value isn't just measured in money, but in decisions, consequences. And the courage to step forward when everything inside you is telling you to turn back, and standing there in that quiet shop, with the coin once again in his hand and the weight of possibility pressing down on him from all sides. Ethan realized something that felt both terrifying and strangely empowering at the same time. This wasn't just about finding something rare. This was about being chosen by a moment that demanded more from him than he had ever given before. And there was no clear path, no simple answer, no guarantee of what would happen next. Only the certainty that whatever came after this would not be small, would not be ordinary, and would not leave him unchanged. Asterisk, and as he stepped back out into the cold night air, the door of the shop closing behind him with a soft but final sound that seemed to echo far louder in his mind than it should have, Ethan paused on the sidewalk, his breath visible in the faint glow of the streetlights, his hand tightening slightly around the coin in his pocket as if he needed to remind himself that it was still there. Still real, still his, because everything that had just happened inside felt almost unreal, like a dream he might wake up from at any moment. And yet the weight of it, the intensity of it, refused to fade, instead settling deeper into him with every passing second. And for the first time since this entire chain of events had begun, he didn't feel lost, he didn't feel broken or directionless. He felt something else entirely, something sharper, more focused. Something that carried both excitement and danger in equal measure. Because now he understood that this wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about the possibility of millions. It was about the choices that came with it, the risks, the attention, the unknown paths that would open the moment he decided what to do next, and as he started walking again, slower this time, more aware, more deliberate. The city around him seemed different, not because it had changed, but because he had. Every shadow carrying a hint of mystery, every passerby a potential story, every small detail suddenly alive with meaning, and his mind began to race through possibilities. Selling the coin, verifying it, hiding it, protecting it, trusting the wrong person, trusting the right one, every option branching into outcomes he couldn't fully predict. And with each step he took, the reality of the situation grew clearer. This was his moment, his responsibility, his decision to make, and no one else could carry that weight for him. And yet beneath all the tension, beneath all the uncertainty, there was something steady building inside him. Something he hadn't felt in a very long time. A sense of control, not over the outcome, but over himself, over how he would face whatever came next, and that realization alone was powerful enough to change everything, because for so long he had believed that life just happened to him, that circumstances defined him. that he was just another person being pushed around by forces he couldn't control. But now, standing there with something rare, something valuable, something that demanded action, he realized that he had a choice, not just about the coin, but about who he wanted to be moving forward. And that thought stayed with him as he walked further into the night, eventually stopping at a quiet intersection where the city lights stretched endlessly in every direction. And without thinking too much about it, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the penny, holding it up between his fingers, letting the light catch its surface one more time, studying it not as a treasure, not as a solution, but as a symbol of everything that had changed inside him since the moment he found it. And for a long time, he just stood there, silent, thinking, feeling the weight of the decision in a way that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with meaning. And then, slowly, almost unexpectedly, a small smile appeared on his face. Not because he had everything figured out, not because he knew exactly what would happen next, but because he finally understood something that had been missing from his life for so long. That value isn't just found, it's created, shaped by the way you respond to the moments you're given, no matter how small they seem at first. And with that realization settling firmly in his mind, he lowered his hand, looked around one last time, and then did something no one would have expected, something that even he hadn't fully planned until that exact second. He flipped the coin lightly into the air, watching it spin under the streetlight, rising, turning, reflecting flashes of gold as it moved. And for a brief moment, it felt like time slowed down again, like everything paused just to witness that single motion. And as the coin reached its peak and began to fall, he didn't reach out to catch it, didn't move to stop it. He simply watched as it dropped back down toward the ground, disappearing into the darkness below. And instead of rushing to find it, instead of panicking or regretting the decision, he took a step back, exhaled slowly, and turned away, leaving it behind. Not because it wasn't valuable, not because it didn't matter, but because in that moment he realized that the real change had never been in the coin itself. It had been in him all along. And as he walked forward into the city, into whatever future waited beyond that night, one thing was certain: whether the coin was worth 1 cent or millions, it had already given him something far greater than money ever could. It had given him back his direction, his awareness, and the understanding that sometimes the most powerful turning points in life don't come from holding on to something rare, but from knowing exactly when to let it go. If you're watching this right now, don't skip, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's something that can completely change the way you see your life. And I'm not saying that lightly, because just like that one small penny that turned everything upside down for Ethan, there are moments hidden in your life right now that you're probably ignoring without even realizing it. Moments that look small, worthless, unimportant, but carry something much bigger behind them. And the truth is, most people never notice them. They scroll past, they move on, they stay stuck exactly where they are. But the ones who pay attention, the ones who stay till the end, the ones who don't miss what others ignore, they're the ones whose lives actually change. And if this story made you feel something, even for a second, if it made you think differently, if it made you question what you've been overlooking in your own life, then you're already ahead of 99% of people watching. And that's exactly why you need to be here. Because this isn't just one story. This is just the beginning. There are more stories, more moments, more hidden truths coming that you don't want to miss. And trust me, the next one might hit even harder than this. It might be the one that actually shifts something inside you for real. So don't just watch and leave like everyone else. Don't be the person who almost found something but didn't stay long enough. Take 1 second right now, hit subscribe, stay connected, and be part of something bigger. Because the next story might not just entertain you. It might actually change you. Subscribe to our channel and become part of something bigger. Because this isn't just about watching videos. It's about discovering stories that stay with you. Stories that make you think, feel, and see the world differently. And if you don't want to miss the next powerful story that could inspire you, surprise you, or even change your perspective, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, so you're always the first to experience what's coming next. Because the next video might be the one you didn't even know you needed. Subscribe to our Secret Coin TV channel **.